Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
When you were little, did you ever see or experience something that didn't make much sense? I remember when I was about 8, my family moved into some condos in my hometown. Nice enough place, about 6 apartments to a building. Each building was a big gray block with narrow walkways between. At one point, I was standing next to my dad at night while he was talking to a friend. We were at the end of one of the walkways. As I was wont to do at that stage of my life, I wandered off by myself, down between 2 of the buildings. Strangely enough, when I got to the end, I met my father. He was hunched over a little bit, fidgeting and making weird sputtering sounds, breathing a little raspy. I said to him, "Dad?" He looked down at me and replied in a broken, high-pitched voice, "I'm not your dad. I'm just pretending to be." I turned around and ran back to the other end of the walkway, and Pop was still there, talking to one of his friends. Who else has strange stories like this from their childhood? All of my friends heard or saw something odd when they were younger. Sometimes I've wondered if children aren't just prone to hallucinating, and maybe that's what I saw.
I jumped from the top of my stairs as a kid. It felt like it was super slow-mo, and I made it all the way to the bottom, a jump that I could not do today.
When I was younger, my mother would often move around a lot. Most of the places we stayed in were kinda strange, but one event in particular has always creeped me out. One night, after everyone in the house had gone to sleep, there were quite a few people staying in the house. I woke up. The room was dark, but not so dark you couldn't see anything. For some reason, I was drawn to a corner of the room. For some reason, no matter how hard I strained my eyes, I couldn't see anything in the corner, and I heard a low growling. There were no animals in the house, no pets. I tried to wake everyone in the room up, but not a single person stirred. Eventually, I forced myself to go back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up with 3 claw marks running down my left foot.
When I was about 12 or 13, 5 or 6 years ago, I had a friend that lived in the middle of nowhere. His house was in the middle of the woods. All of his neighbors, about 3 houses, were either old people or people who didn't come out much. Him and I were out in the woods with machetes hacking out new trails that branched off from the main trail he used for quadding. Nothing was weird at all. We were out there for hours, and when the sun just started to set, we decided to go back to his house. We each brought a flashlight just in case, but at this point we didn't have to use them. We walked for about 15 minutes until we reached the main quad trail. His house was probably another 15 minutes away. At this point, it was just about dark enough to still be able to see, but not make any specific details as to what you were looking at. We still didn't need to use our flashlights. We were just walking along talking about dumb boy shit when we heard rustling in the bushes behind us. Didn't scare us much because there are a bunch of deer where I live. He turned around to check out how close the deer was, and as I kept walking, I heard him quietly say, "Dude." I remember thinking that the deer must be really close and that he wanted my attention, so I turned around to look. What I saw wasn't a deer. It was probably about 20 to 30 feet away, and was the shape of an 8 to 10-foot man. It just stood there. It didn't have a threatening posture, it just looked like it was, well, standing around. As I said before, it was that time of dusk where you couldn't really make any details in what you saw that wasn't within like 5 feet of you. That is all that I could see of it. A tall, broad, and dark silhouette of this thing. Right after I turned and saw it, I made a weird cry that I can still remember today. My bud and I looked at each other, and then I looked back. It was still there in the same posture. My buddy then said, "Run," in a frightened voice. And when I looked over at him, he was already like 10 feet away from me and running down the trail. I booked it after him, and we made the 15-minute trip in what seemed like no time. When we got to his house, the back porch light was on, and we couldn't see very well because what was in front of us was shadowed by the light. We went inside and went into his room. He then closed the blinds and the door, and we just sat there and caught our breath. We decided to watch a Bruce Lee movie to help us calm down. We did, and when it was done, we played some GameCube for a little bit. It was probably about midnight by now, and my friend said that he left his machete out in the woods. His dad was a pretty strict guy, so he said we needed to go back and get it. So we did. My buddy had a .22 rifle that he was allowed to shoot birds with whenever he wanted, so he grabbed that and a pocket full of rounds, and I grabbed the machete I had when we were out in the woods earlier. He had a super bright electric lantern that he strapped to his belt buckle, and I had a big maglite that belonged to his dad. We walked back through the quad trail, and even though we were both scared shitless, we felt somewhat secure because he had a gun. We eventually made it back to the spot where we saw the thing, and his machete was where he left it on the ground. We couldn't find any prints or anything because the ground was covered in leaves and feces. I carried his machete along with mine back to the house, and it was way more scary because we believed now that the thing would follow us. We got back to his house, again, and put all of the stuff away. We didn't see the thing on the way back, and I haven't seen it again considering that was the last time I went over to his house. Him and I haven't hung out since then because he changed schools. I haven't talked to him in years. Where I live, the largest animal we have in the wild are deer. I could see this thing being mistaken for a small bear on its hind legs, but there aren't any on or near the island that I live on.
Until about the time I turned 9, I could never sleep with my door closed. I always feared something in my room getting me before I could get out. It doesn't help that my eyesight went bad at a young age. I currently wear a -7 prescription for both eyes, and things tend to look like they're moving when I take off my glasses. It would seem like my closet door, which never closed, would slightly wobble back and forth. The last time I slept with my door open, I woke up because of a flickering light in the hallway outside of my room. I opened my eyes in time to see the bathroom across the hall light up and go dark several times in succession. It turns out that the light shorted out that night, but what I saw in the time the light flickered was a tall figure walking past my door. At first I figured it might be my father, but when I thought about it, the figure's head nearly reached the ceiling, and it looked bald, unlike my father. Since then I can't sleep with my door open, even a crack, mostly because after I take my glasses off, it appears to move slightly.
Okay, I've got one. I'm from Louisiana, and I was 4 when Hurricane Andrew rocked the state. We lived in a different house then, and my family had prepared the living room as a kind of little command center to hunker down together and weather the storm. The living room had 2 doorways, no doors, just doorways, that led into the hall. The space between the openings was enough to fit a couch and maybe an end table. Anyway, one of the days of the storm, the rain had stopped, but the wind was still raging. My mom had opened our front door. There wasn't a screen, but I guess she thought it was okay for some reason, and was on the phone. The power was out, and the only light coming in was from the storm cloud outdoors, so everything was this sort of drab gray. The room looked like there was no color. Our couch was folded out into a bed, and my dad was asleep on it. My mom walked back into the bedroom, leaving me alone with my sleeping dad. I don't remember where I got it from, but I had a little red balloon with a yellow string. I was standing on one side of the couch bed, in front of one of the doorways, watching TV and holding the balloon. For some reason, I let go of it and walked around to the other side of the bed in front of the other doorway. When I turned around, the balloon was exactly where I had left it. Exactly. It hadn't risen up to the ceiling or drifted or anything. It was there, gently swaying at exactly the height I'd left it. I remember just staring at it, feeling this sense of a sort of wrongness about it. I slowly sidestepped into the hallway, which was dark since the only light was filtering from the living room's open door. Slowly, eerily, the balloon drifted through the opposite doorway, stopping in the center of the hallway directly across from me. When I moved back into the living room, the balloon followed. I remember feeling very nervous. I don't know what happened next. I guess my mom came back or something. I remember telling her what had happened and being laughed off since I was so young.
I have 2 fairly interesting stories to tell. When I was about 11 or 12, I had something weird happen. I hadn't really had a very good memory, but I really don't remember a lot from when I was little. Bits and pieces, mostly black and white. But one night, I was lying in bed, and I think some sort of thing was visiting me, maybe in my dream. Maybe it was just a dream, but it told me a bunch of stuff. I don't remember what it said, or even if it was in English. Then it did something and put its hand in my stomach, to which I woke up and was sweating, laying on my stomach, and promptly flew up off my bed about 2 or 3 feet like I was slammed in the gut. It left me breathless for a while and scared the shit out of me. I felt more sentient after that and grew far more intelligent than I was. I still have no clue what the hell it was. Second, my middle school supposedly had a haunted gym. I didn't give a crap, nor did I believe it. One day I was walking by the doors to it, and the halls were empty except me. And the doors are old, medium weight wood, with a space in between where light shines through and you can peek in. I was walking past to get to class and saw this white mass in the gym out of the corner of my eye. I stopped and did a double take. It looked odd, but I thought it was just the light, or this plastic sheet that had been covering a vent that was in there for some time for repairs. I looked back because I thought it originally to be sunlight, then realized it was overcast and raining. I looked in and saw nothing, not even that white plastic. I thought about it for a moment, and the shape and size of this white figure would have been the size of a middle schooler sitting against a wall with a book on their legs.
One time when I was around 3 or 4, I was sitting in the back seat of my mom's van at night. I can't clearly remember why we were out that particular night, most likely picking one of my siblings up from somewhere. I, like probably a lot of kids, didn't wear my seatbelt, and while looking over the edge of my seat, I saw a man, or teenage boy, lying on the car floor staring up at me. He spoke to me, and I don't remember what he said now, but when I moved off my seat to join him, he complained that I was stepping on him. For some reason, I was neutral to this whole phenomena, and while it could have been a dream, I clearly remember it happening in real time. Around the same age, I was lying on the floor playing with one of my toys beside my pet black cat, and she began talking to me. I spoke back to her. Then all of a sudden, she just started screaming, like human-like screaming. And I stared at her, and she never spoke again from that day on. I was the only one in the room who noticed this, because I wasn't alone in the room. On another occasion, I was walking down the hallway, and I looked over the hallway divider and noticed a dark figure standing up amidst the darkness filling the family room, and no one was in there. From my mental perspective at the time, it looked like an ape or gorilla, but I've always just written that one off as my imagination. Also, for the record, I'm not schizophrenic, nor do I have any other mental issues that would induce hallucinations, and I most certainly don't take drugs, haha. Then there was the time, years later when I was around 6 or 7, where I was dreaming that I was dinosaur hunting or something of that nature with a childhood friend, and then there was a loud ringing out of nowhere that wouldn't go away, like the kind of ring you get in your ears. My dream went black, and I was conscious, but for the life of me, I couldn't open my eyes, and my ears were continuing to ring like crazy. I can't remember if I had woken up previously and left my room to fall asleep on the couch in the family room, but I was lying there, panicking and clawing at my eyelids while crying out and calling for my parents. It was terrifying. My dad came running in, asking me urgently what was wrong as he grabbed my arm to check on me, and I could finally open my eyes. I wouldn't call it paranormal, but it was freaky. Nothing like it has happened since.
I remember back when I was around 4, I lived in a townhouse with my parents and my older cousin. My parents were pretty young back then, 22, and my cousin was 15. They would always be out drinking together. Anyways, I had this dream that felt real. Probably the earliest dream I can remember of being outside our townhouse. My parents were drinking with my cousin and his friends. Then I remember something grabbing me by my shirt and yanking me. I tried to run, and then I woke up. The weird thing is, I woke up looking at myself, like I was above my body. I could feel my legs moving like I was running, like an out-of-body experience, I guess. Anyways, later, when we moved, my parents told me they thought the house was haunted because of several things that happened there, which brings up my second memory. I remember my parents used to leave me upstairs to bathe on my own, and I used to be too scared to get up and dress, so I would sit in the tub for a long time. I remember I used to see people walking towards the door and then disappearing. It gives me the creeps thinking about it.
Haven't thought about this in quite a while, but I did have this recurring event throughout my childhood. I can't recall how many times or how often it happened. Enough to be annoying, but not enough to concern me that much. Lying in bed at night, trying to go to sleep, I'd start hearing voices calling my name. They didn't say anything, just repeated my name over and over. It would grow into a cacophony of voices, as though there were a room full of people all trying to get my attention at the same time. Some were voices I recognized, voices of friends, relatives, and acquaintances, while most were voices I couldn't place. Some were shouting urgently, others speaking calmly, as though in casual conversation. This would go on for a while at a time. I couldn't figure out what the hell they wanted, why they were trying so hard to get my attention, and basically all I wanted was for it to stop so I could sleep. As far as I remember, it would eventually fade away. It may be worth noting that the voices were in my head. It wasn't like I was hearing people who were physically in the room with me, which probably would have been more disturbing.
I've got a few. When I was very young, say 5 or 6, I would stay over at my grandmother's apartment. She had this big bed in the guest room, which is where I slept, that had a huge headboard. It was big and had things carved at the top. At night, I'd always see the things on it start moving. There was also an air vent in the room, and I started seeing this horrible old woman staring out of it at me. I'd always freak out and run to my grandmother's room. Eventually, I started sleeping on the couch because it scared me so much. Also, this vent was so tiny that you couldn't fit a cat in it, let alone a person. About 3 years ago, my grandmother moved into a downstairs apartment because the stairs were too much. The lady that moved in after her had a 3-year-old son. He saw the exact same thing that I had seen when I was a child. When I was about 8 or 9, we moved into a new house. From my bed, you could see the living room and the arch leading to the kitchen. I was laying on my bed one night with the door open. I learned not to do that pretty soon. I rolled over towards the door and saw a figure in the archway. It was very smoky looking and was floating a few feet off the ground. It had these awful red eyes, but for some reason I convinced myself that it was smoke from a fire. I dropped to the floor and crawled to my parents' room to tell them. My dad went to check and he walked right through the thing but didn't notice it. He came back and told me nothing was there and that it was probably a bad dream or something and told me to sleep in my sister's room. I could still see the thing looking at me, so I slept in my sister's room. When I laid there, I could see a figure in the closet. A few years later, my sister and I swapped rooms for some reason. My mom made us do this every few years. Anyways, one night I was on the phone with a friend and I heard scratching from my closet. This was weird because both of my cats were in the front of the house on the sofa. So I held the phone up to the door to ask my friend if she heard it. She said she did, so I told her I was going to open it. She freaked out and told me not to, but I did anyways. When I opened it, there was a humanoid cat-like figure that hissed at me and disappeared. I freaked out and slammed the door. When I looked later, there were claw marks on the door. At a New Year's party one year with some friends, we decided to play with a Ouija board. We were talking to something. I can't remember its name, but I remember it was male. Anyways, we had a little electric cotton candy maker, and it suddenly started going, and it was going way too fast for normal. So, we tried to turn it off, but it wasn't on. So we unplugged it, and it got faster. Then the lights flickered, and something began to scrap the window. There were no trees around the house. So while we're all freaking out, I feel something grab me and launch me across the room. I came to, and my friends were freaking out because the door wouldn't open. Eventually it did, and we ran into the hall. Later on, the rest of the people in the house said they hadn't heard anything. I was at a friend's house once and we were looking in the mirror. We saw a man in black behind us. We turned and nothing was there. But when we looked back at the mirror, he had gotten closer. We ran the hell out of there. Recently, as in the past few months, I've been seeing this old hag. Like, remember how you thought a witch looked when you were a kid? A woman like that. Anyways, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. I'll be driving or sitting in class or something, and suddenly I'm hit with this image of her screaming and coming at me. It scares the hell out of me and I have no idea what it is. I've got a few more, but I'm having trouble remembering them. Oh. During high school, I had this reoccurring nightmare. In it, there were these things. They looked human, but had no ears or hair and no nose. Anyways, they were always bleeding or burned or being tortured in some odd way. I'd wake up screaming, and I would still be able to see them in my room. I remember a lot of them looked like they were wearing soldier uniforms. Also, no matter how loud I screamed, no one in my house heard me. I would end up crying myself back to sleep or turning the lights on and not sleeping.
To this day, My mother and grandmother will not let me live down something I cannot ever remember saying. It was a long while back and I was very young. I figure anywhere from 4 to 6, as I was definitely at school already at this point. I had just spent a night or two at my grandmother's and my mother had just come to pick me up. Now, I cannot at all remember this happening. I'm just told about it. But apparently what happened next was my mother mentioned something about my father being out of town for work, and I said, you know, my real dad died. They were both very confused, and then I said, Fluff was my real dad. He was a builder. He worked on the roads. That's how he died. My mother and grandmother reminded me of this about a week or two after it happened, and I was seriously scared as a kid because, well, I don't know. Where the hell did I come up with that? My grandmother and mother always bring this up now, later in life. I hear about it every few weeks.
I was at camp with my 3rd grade class, and we slept in these 2 separate gender-divided dorms on the campsite, with little cubicles with 1 bunk bed in each. I was sleeping on the top bunk, because that's how I roll. I was never one to sleep at night, and I'm still not. But I managed to force myself to, because I had nothing else to do but lie there. I had a pretty bad nightmare from there, though I can't remember it now. And when I opened my eyes, I saw a pair of large red eyes on the cubicle wall beside me, staring back before closing. That freaked me out. But what can you do when your teacher threatens suspension to anyone found outside their bed during the night? So I forced myself back to sleep. That morning, I woke up with my sleeping bag slipping halfway off the bed, along with one of my legs, and I was freezing. Thinking I must have tossed and turned a lot, I got out of bed, got dressed, did everything as normal. It wasn't until I had returned to my school campus that I had people approaching me and saying weird things, like, "You nearly gave me a heart attack last night." I had no idea what they were talking about, so I ignored it. When my mom came to pick me up, the teacher wanted to have a word with her, and afterwards she approached me and asked me if I went into the other dorm last night and slammed the door, and I told her, no. It turns out that during my sleep, I had hopped down from my bed, and I remember the impact from landing in a crouched position on the floor, and went into the other dorm, let the heavy door slam shut behind me, and stood there. When the teachers confronted me, I was mumbling incoherently and wasn't responding, so they affirmed I was sleepwalking and put me back to bed, quite sloppily, from how I had found myself in the morning. I had no history of sleepwalking, but if it wasn't for it being obvious that I would have been in some deep trouble. TLDR, sleeping sucks.
My mom told me a story like this about herself once. She said when she was young there was a crack on the stairs with a guy in it called Hockey, and if anything went near the hole, Hockey would get it and keep it forever. She once dropped one of her sister's toys down the hole, and my grandparents got mad at her. Another time, she said she was dancing in the garden with a soft toy, and it went over the wall and she never got it back. She said she thought it went down Hockey's hole. Also, the stairs at my grandparents' house do not have any cracks or anything where Hockey's hole could have been. I guess this isn't the same as the others. It's just sort of muddled memories and kid imagination. It's kind of weird, though.
My parents used to take me to one of the city parks in my hometown at least once a week. One summer evening, when I was 4 or 5, we went to the biggest park in the city, a city of only 17,000 people, and found it mostly empty. That didn't surprise my parents because we arrived around dusk on a weekday. They left me to play around one of the 3 playgrounds while they sat on a bench. I climbed around it for a while and then used the slide on the opposite side. I slid down and landed at the feet of what appeared to be a person in a pink and purple panda suit. As strange as that sounds, I remember it vividly. The suit was pink where a panda is white and purple where it would be black, and I remember it picked me up and spun me around, which I found quite fun. I remember during that point getting the distinct impression that I was completely alone with the panda and that my parents simply didn't exist. The spinning would have happened in full view of my parents, but the only time I ever brought it up after becoming an adult, they just looked at me blankly. They do remember that particular trip because I talked about a man in a panda suit, but they never saw the panda suit. I also apparently used to freak out because I'd see things hiding in the rafters of warehouse-style buildings like Walmart or bowling alleys. any place with exposed rafters. Strangely enough, I always likened the creatures to polar bears in my now adult imagination. Maybe I just hate bears, but these two experiences really do stick with me from my childhood.
I was living on a hill farm, as my father was a shepherd. I was watching TV one idle Sunday afternoon, and there was a thunderclap with no lightning. Not unusual, it happens all the time. But on the field opposite the window, the sheep, about 20, gathered in a semicircle, facing inwards. 3 sheep stood in the middle facing the rest of the flock. The center sheep of the 3 middle ones stepped forward, bleated once, and the entire group dispersed all over the field, without really seeming to move. Do not trust sheep. There is an unknown level to them. I know, I lived alongside them for 16 years.
I'm from a rural area in the Canadian prairies, and I live in a 120-year-old farmhouse with many houses of similar ages around the countryside. Many of these places are abandoned, due to the poor farming economy of the past 40 years and whatnot. Anyway, my dad tells me stories about the people he went to school with in the 50s and 60s as a kid. He mentions one kid from a creepy family that never left their farm, which was a big deal at the time because everyone knew everyone in the country. Apparently, both parents died in their home without seeking medical attention, and the boy was sent to an insane asylum. Hell yeah, 1960. This is gonna be long. When I got my license at 16, I drove my friends out of the city and we tried to find a good place to get high without being noticed. We found an approach to an old farmhouse and barn that were obviously long abandoned, so we thought it would be okay to try it there. I suggested we check the place out prior to pot, so we walked up to the house. Dead of night, by the way. It was decrepit. No door, windows broken, peeling paint, etc. There was nothing in the room nearest the entranceway save for an old armchair and documents scattered everywhere. We didn't want to go upstairs because it looked unsafe, so we checked out the barn. The barn was slumped on one side and full of chains, hooks, and slaughterhouse equipment. We assumed they must have been killing their own livestock, but everything had deteriorated and was full of rust, blood stains on the cutting boards, etc. We left. Fast. Didn't bother getting high either, just drove home. 2 days later, my dad mentioned the creepy family in conversation again, saying that their old barn had burnt to the ground a few nights ago. Never made the connection until I drove by the place in the daylight a few weeks later. Same place, totally burnt down. My friends and I were the last ones to see it, and we certainly didn't start the fire.
That's creepy. Mine's not so creepy, but weird. My very first memory is just the sensation of watching this swirling black and white and gray shifting pattern. I don't know how long I watched it, but suddenly it just vanished, and I was sitting on our couch. It was strange now when I think about it, because from the way I acted at that point, it's like I knew things without thinking about them. But I didn't know any details. I was 4. I knew the kid beside me was my brother. I heard my mom talking on the phone and I ran up to her and yelled, "Mom!" several times, but knowing my brother and knowing her, it just felt like not real at first, like I was going through the motions. Eventually I got her attention and I asked her my name. She told me and I corrected her that I wanted to know my full name, which she told me. Satisfied, I went back to the couch, hitting the triangle-shaped button on the VCR, and a show started playing. Apparently, the folks had shown me how to work the play button. My point is, it was strange, like I was only conscious after that magical day when I was 4, and my body was doing the driving until then.
Sometimes I wonder if anyone is real or if everything is just a simulation, like I'm the only real conscious person. I guess that's what you call solipsism. When I was young, I always thought about this, since I was about 3, the age where I first remember being conscious. I had a dream that I was placed on Earth in a field with concrete all around me. Someone placed me there. My friend was pretty dim-witted. I thought that people had various lives and that this was his first life, which explained why he was so stupid, but I had lived many lives. I often felt that I was the only conscious person and everyone around me were actors. I haven't experienced weird things, but I remember sleeping once and waking up to the sound of a scratching noise coming from the corner of my room. I would put my head under the covers. Monsters can't hurt you under the covers, I thought, and it would go away. I would come out from under the covers and it would return. Eventually it went away. One thing I can say about my dreams is, I think they are important. I've had things I've seen in my dreams happen in real life. They aren't usually clear, but they happen. It's like a puzzle. Maybe my dream from a child means something. One dream I hope isn't real is one where I was told my father was going to die in a very serious tone after a rather silly dream. Me and my friend are almost identical. We like everything the same interests, everything. We see the number 23 everywhere. We started doing research and found out about the law of fives. 2 + 3 = 5. And then we decided to see if we could create this with any number. We randomly chose 9. And now we're finding out that 9 is everywhere too. 3 × 3 = 9, Holy Trinity. Earth is the third planet, etc., etc. It's 5:22 a.m. right now.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.